వాళ్ళు ఇస్తారా? కనపడుతుందా పెట్టి? ఓకే. స్టార్ట్. హలో హలో హలో, గుడ్ మార్నింగ్. Hello, good morning. Am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning. Here I would like to teach you today about your core subject in span development. Are you able to listen to me? Are you able to hear?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, fine. So the core paper of lifespan development deals with the different stages a person undergoes in his life. The lifespan of an individual starts right from the time of his conception and in psychology, fifth sem core paper, lifespan development. So here in the lifespan development, it deals actually with all the stages, the different aspects of actually an individual, how he fathoms or how he undergoes all the different stages in his life. The span of an individual, the whole life, he undergoes certain changes. All the changes that an individual he undergoes, they come under the lifespan development. The lifespan development theories in psychology try to understand, try to describe all the stages of development in an individual life. They also try to explain what are the different things that happen at different stages in an individual. And also they try to forecast and try to optimize a person's development in the different stages so that a person can feel or he can feel a fulfilled, a happy life. Now that is an interdisciplinary course because the psychology lifespan development deals with either medical expertise, sometimes with systems like education, and also psychology also something deals with the technology. All these aspects of different subjects try to influence how we actually try to enrich our lives. So whether a person can make use of his life in a satisfactory way, or what are the changes that happen in a person's life with which he could be able to adjust as well as lead a happy, what you call a fully liberated as well as an exhilarating as well as a happy life. That depends on how you actually try to view your life and how the spans, how you try to understand your lifespan. We all know that all the advances in technology and all the cultural attitudes have made a difference in people's understanding in the modern days. So when we try to understand life, we are also trying to interpret how life is being undergone in different societies. What are the cultural attitudes, cultural impetus given to the viewing about life as such? Now, the growth, differentiation, maturation, and development, these are all the different aspects of lifespan development with which the students are able to actually made understand, and they are made to understood in the first few chapters of this textbook. We know that always in the lifespan development, there is something like development, but development is both quantitative as well as qualitative, whereas growth is only quantitative. For example, when we talk about the phenomenon called as growth, suppose you see a plant. And when you see a plant, it comes from a sapling to a full-fledged plant. And here you see that the stages of the growth are accompanied with changes in size, shape, the diameter, and other things. Now, such changes are quantified, they can be measurable, and they are known as the changes. Whereas the development as such you cannot quantify, but the development concept involves the changes in growth also. So development involves growth, that is quantitative, as well as certain other changes which are qualitative. Now, in between these terms, we hear something like maturation. Maturation is, we call a system matured if it is aged. Age is a process which comes across the time span. If you actually undergo a change, an object or an individual is subjected to certain times or space, they actually undergo some changes. Now we call this as aging, and this aging process is known as maturation. But when we come to the growth and development, there are certain changes. For example, if you consider the growth, it is measurable. Whereas the development, it involves, besides biological, there are certain other changes which involve the changes in morality, changes in understanding, changes in what you call the psychological aspects of the individual, the emotional aspects of the individual, and how the individual tries to interact with the other social beings, that is with his friends or peers. Now, in development means there are all these changes are the whole aspects of, or the different aspects of the individual are completely undergoing changes. That is, if you consider a small child, what are his morals or what is his understanding? And when you compare that with that of a grown person, you find that there are changes in his moral being, in his understanding, in his intelligence, in his psychological aspects of psychological aspects, as well as in the sexual aspects and emotional aspects also. There are sometimes the development may be positive, sometimes it may be negative. That is, some individual may find, you may find that they are able to deal with certain consequences, whereas some people may find somewhat anxious, you find them with anxious or fear or etc. So how actually individuals turn out will depend on the developmental stages that they have gone through. Sometimes the development involves losses, gains, and also some neutral changes, whereas growth actually, it reaches the S curve, that is, it grows to a certain extent, and then you find the deterioration. The maturation, on the other hand, involves the changes in the brain as well as the nervous system. So when an organism grows, there are also certain changes in the brain and nervous system of the individual that is subject to the growth. So growth, maturation, and development are used somewhat interconvertibly, that is in place of one or another, but we know clearly that maturation is dependent on the aging process, whereas growth is more of a term used when you actually find changes in the quantitative aspect, that is in size, that is the physical size or the height, weight, etc. Whereas the development aspect involves both the qualitative, that is the emotional aspects, the developmental aspects, the knowledge aspects, the how an individual deals with his society, how he talks to other people, the emotional aspects, and all the other aspects which completely makes a person a developed one. Now, when we consider the principles of development, there are certain things you find in development that are common to all the individuals. That is, we find that the development is a continuous process. From one stage to another, we find that is, for example, from a small child, an individual grows into an adult one, and from an adult one, he becomes degenerated or old, and then he dies. So the lifespan deals with an organism starting from the stage of conception, that is, say from the prenatal stage to that of the old age. All the changes, that developmental stages that are accompanied, come under the lifespan. So here in the lifespan development, we find that it is a continuous change. The change is continuous in the sense that there is a preceding stage and there is a succeeding stage. From one stage to another, we find the individuals gradually transiting. For example, the prenatal period is from conception to birth. And whereas that is right from the starting of the individual, that is the zygote, where the sperm tries to fuse with that of an egg, and there is a fetal implantation in the mother. And from the time of conception to the birth, it is known as the prenatal period, whereas the neonatal period is from the time of birth to 2 weeks. Why the problem?
Yeah, good morning, Kankaturu madam.
Yeah. Are you able to listen?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, exactly.
I find some problem. That's why I asked him somebody to help. No problem. Continue. I'll continue. So,
yeah, if you don't mind, please on your video, ma'am, for a snapping purpose.
But then he has put it off, sir. But let me continue in so that when he comes, I'll ask him to put on.
Yeah.
So after the neonatal period, that is from the birth to 2 weeks after the birth, that is a neonatal period. That is a fresh baby. Neo means new, natal, after being born. You find the baby trying to adjust. Whereas from the 2 weeks to 2 years time, it is known as it is known as the babyhood stage. Whereas from 2 years to 6 years, 2 years to 6 years, it is known as the early childhood stage, where the child tries to adjust to the new environment and tries to acquire new skills and new types of attitudes, which actually help it to get along with the environment. From the age of 6 years to 12 to 13 years is known as the late childhood stage, where the child tries to interact with the environment and tries to get more skills and more knowledge about its environment. The next stage would be the adolescent stage, which is from 13 years or 12 to 13 years to 18 to 19 years, where the child tries to develop the new acquired skills, tries to develop the abstract thinking, and develops more knowledge. The adulthood is from the age of 18 to 19 up till say 35 years, where the individual tries to acquire more knowledge and also tries to get the inputs from the environment and tries to develop new ways of dealing with his environment and new skills, which actually help him to navigate his life. Now, the development aspect is a continuous process. It involves change, and also it is actually a change which grows from general to specific. For example, if you see a child, the child is actually able to develop only certain reflexes, which actually they try to gradually develop into specific sort of responses. For example, a child, he tries to uphold his hand to somebody who passes him by, and gradually he gives into movements where he has specific skills, whereas he is able to lift his hand or show an object or something like that, where the skills become specific. And similarly, from babbling sounds, he is able to spell out clearly and speak small words, which actually are a sort of trying to develop his linguistic skills, where he uses his brain as well as his mouth and other organs. So here, development is an orderly pattern where there are specific, in a particular order, the development grows. For example, we find that the speed of development will vary actually from person to person, but in spite of the differences in individuals from person to person, we find a specific series of changes occurring in individuals. So development is continuous, development is in an orderly process, development involves change, and also development is a product of environment and heredity. Regarding this issue, we know that the development is, of course, a matter of hereditary changes, because the genetic composition of an individual tries to determine how an individual will grow, develop, and also get new skills. But at the same time, it is the environment, the environmental influences which we give to an individual that try to also actually help in the process of development. Also, in spite of having the similar type of growth patterns in individuals, we find that the individuals are unique in the sense that no two persons' development occurs in the same manner. Of course, there are certain stages which are common to individuals, but at the same time, the individuals react in a different manner depending on their genetic predisposition, that is what genes they have, as well as to what influences they are being subjected to. That is both the genes as well as heredity, or the interaction of actually a person's inner potential along with that of the environment, that actually helps in the growth of an individual. So we therefore say that a stimulating environment, that is where an environment which is conducive to the development of the child, that is having enthusiastic parents or elders who actually support the child in his development and who facilitate his learning and develop curiosity in them, is very important. At the same time, the encouragement to the children should also be given, and proper guidance so as the inner potentiality could be truly realized, are some of the aspects which we can glean from this aspect of development. That is, development also requires support. The principles of interaction between the heredity and environment also means that the environment should be suitably conducive. That is, environment, good environment actually tries to make the individual learn more and also understand his whole life or the lifespan's different aspects, and also help him to better grasp all the skills which help him to lead a fruitful life. Also, sometimes we call an individual during his period of life, his personality gradually unfolds. This unfolding of personality means that he ages as well as he learns. So learning has also, that is, we learn from every incident, we learn in schools and colleges, but we also learn from society, we learn from our experiences. So along with the maturation, we are also able to learn things, and the concept of this learning also influences a person's development. Sometimes development is predictable, but sometimes it is not. Generally, the trend is the whole overall process or the stages of development are predictable, but there are certain people who sometimes lag behind in development. This is because they deviate from the average. You find sometimes a quicker development happening, and sometimes there is a lag or slowness in the development, which makes the persons develop somewhat slowly. At some stages, we find that there is a spurt in development. That is, most of the individuals we find at the age of 12 or 13, we find a rapid spurt in the development. At some stages, the development is faster. As in a child, the child, how he learns and develops in a short span of time is much more faster than an older person. In an older person, there is a stability, and therefore the development process is somewhat slower. That is, the rate of development across different periods in development will vary. Also, there is this concept of control or motor development or direction. For example, when a person actually grows, that is, physiological growth is there. We know that the growth is also a concept of development. As I told you earlier, development involves both quantitative, that is growth, as well as qualitative changes. And therefore, when we see a person, he grows from cephalocaudal, that is from the head to the toes. That is, there is initially the growth in the head, which actually grows in the length. And similarly, when he grows in width, it is from proximo-distal. Proximal means nearer and distal means far away. That is from center to outwards he is able to grow. So there are certain ways in which the growth occurs, and therefore we call this growth is also a part of the development. Similarly, there are motor development involved with the nervous system and brain system. So development also involves all the biological changes that are accompanying a person's development growth. Sometimes there is an orderly sequence, a uniform pattern with which the cells develop. Sometimes we also see that the individuals, there are certain discrepancies, but there is certain orderly sequence. That is, we see all the children exhibit certain patterns when they are child, or all the adolescents exhibit certain patterns of growth. But we also see that due to certain hazards, or say there are certain certain problems, or certain growth hazards, or sometimes what we call certain obstacles in their growth. For example, a child born to an alcoholic parent, maybe the growth, the development will be somewhat different, in the sense he is subjected to certain social ill, and therefore his growth will somewhat different. That is, he becomes poorly adjusted, or he is somewhat fearful of his parents, etc. So what I call here is there are certain potential hazards, like being subjected to alcoholic parents, or being subjected to poverty, extreme poverty, or being subjected to what you call livelihood situations where they are expected to certain things, or sometimes they're subjected to some calamities or natural calamities where the person's development, what we call cognitive or psychological development, is somewhat impeded, or it becomes a hazard for their development. And therefore, this potential hazard can have a bearing on the individual's growth. So sometimes we call those persons poorly adjusted, or sometimes they are not able to grasp what has happened and they become immature. So when we come back to what we have learned till now, we know that the development process is different from growth. Growth is only quantitative, whereas development involves both quantitative as well as qualitative changes. Development is continuous. Development is also from one stage to another. Development has certain periods of which development can be divided into certain stages or periods of growth. And development follows an orderly pattern. Development proceeds from general to specific. Development involves maturation or growth, as well as that is a particular period called as adolescence. Development is unique to individuals. Development also involves the interaction between the environment as well as the genes or the hereditary component. Development is often predictable. Development has certain direction. Development also follows a uniform pattern. Development is interrelated, and every development stage has certain hazards, which, if overcome, will be able to lead to better adjustment. Now, if we come to the stages of human lifespan, we find that there are prenatal stage. The prenatal stage is from the time of conception to the time of birth. That is, generally in the human beings, it is up to 280 days. Sometimes it may vary, but then it starts with actually the zygote getting attached to the wall of the uterus, mother's uterus, which is known as the implantation stage. And afterwards, the zygote grows up till 2 weeks, which is actually the prenatal period. And from the time that is up till 2 months, from 2 weeks to 2 months is the prenatal period. And after 2 months, that is from the 3rd month until the time of birth, is known as the fetal period. So the whole stage is known as the prenatal stage. Later, when a child is born, from the time of the birth up till he reaches up till 2 years is the infant stage. Here, the child tries to learn certain techniques to get along with the environment. He is able to learn, when he's born, the child is able to learn about breathing, because he comes into environment, he has to take in the own oxygen, and therefore he starts breathing. He learns to suck from the mother's breast, that is, he learns suckling as well as swallowing, and he learns also to discharge his bodily waste. So gradually, he also learns other things which helps him in movement and other things. So up till 2 years, that is the infant stage, he learns several reflexes and skills which are beneficial for him to exist as an individual. From 2 to 6 years is the early childhood stage, where the child is able to get along with the environment by learning more motor reflexes and also develops mental abilities, which actually help him to prepare for the formal learning, that is school education. Next comes the middle childhood. After the infancy and the early childhood come the middle childhood, from the age of, say, from the 6 years to 13 years, where the child is able to develop his logical, rational thinking and also thinking process. And he is able to understand logically what are the outcomes of a particular action. Here, he learns to develop more memory. He has more conceptual development. He tries to understand concepts. He tries to think logically. And here at the same time, but he's not fully knowledgeable enough to develop abstract thinking. For example, he's not able to understand the abstract concepts of life, happiness, or say mathematical abstractness here. So as for that, again, the change occurs from 13 to 19 years, where the child grows more. And here in the adolescent period, that is known as from 13 to 19 years, here in this period, the child is able to learn with more maturity and with more reproductive ability, is also able to develop in all aspects. And with growth also comes here a stage where he is able to understand the different skills as well as the different abstract concepts, and he's able to learn other skills which actually help him to undertake all the psychological challenges he faces in his life, and he's able to deal all the skills he's able to gain here, with which he's able to face life. The next comes the early adulthood, that is from say 19 years to about 35 years, the early part of the adulthood, where in this period, all his relationships mature. He's able to procure a job. He's able to develop relationships with other sex, that is, have a marriage partnership, also have children and rear children. So he's in this aspect, he's trying to learn about how to settle in his life, as well as understand how to earn a livelihood, as well as understand the relationships around him. Then comes the age of middle adulthood, that is from the age of 35 onwards up till 60, where he's able to rationalize, understand his role in the human society, and also develop what you call more aspects, more skills. But at the same time, we find in some individuals, because he is gradually aging, he or she, we find certain climacteric changes, that is, there is some reproductive ability loss, or sometimes we find different diseases, or some aspects of changes where there are what you call changes in body, that is physiological functions, as well as dramatic changes in performance of major organs such as digestive system, circulatory system. That is, we see a gradual deterioration. And here, there is also sometimes we have here not much of a learning or intellectual capacities, but we find here the people become more wise as well as more creative. That is, they are able to understand things better in a better perspective, and therefore they become proficient in solving all the life problems. Then comes the old age, where after the age of 60 up till the person, and when he dies actually, which may vary from person to person, here in this stage, the individual is able to understand the aspects of life, that is, he actually retires from active social work. At the same time, old people have to cope up with many challenges, such as having physical illnesses or death of the near ones, or trying to take care of their grandchildren, or trying to cope up with the rest of the activities with which they are associated. But most of the individuals try to also be happy and cope up and try to understand and adjust. So how a person actually faces life depends on his understanding of the lifespan development, as well as trying to adjust to the situation, that is having the maturation as well as development. So development does not stop at one phase. Growth may stop, say, after an initial spurt, Growth may become stable, say after 35, 40 years, and actually you find degeneration also. But development does not stop until the person actually voluntarily tries to give up, but development goes on up till the person's last breath. So the different developmental tasks we show are there we associated to certain tasks with certain period stages of development. For example, a child is supposed to do certain tasks, that is learn. An adult is supposed to do certain tasks, that is carry on his social responsibilities, behave ethically, behave morally towards others in society, contribute to the development of society, etc. And similarly, in the same way, you find the old age persons to have certain tasks. That is, these developmental tasks are both biological as well as those which are actually implied by the society to make a person do at a particular life stage. And therefore, here we know that all the developmental tasks are determined to a certain extent by the society, and they may vary, but at the same time, they actually help the individual to set one's life goals and act accordingly. Therefore, we can say now the developmental tasks are also actually we try to understand these developmental tasks, and we try to improve these developmental tasks. They are sometimes like role assignment, where a particular role is assigned to each of the stages of development. So we know what tasks are expected of us from the society, and also we try to consolidate our previous changes along with the new changes. That is, when we pass from, say, early childhood to middle childhood, we know what the society expects, and at the same time what tasks we are expected to do, and we try to develop those tasks and find certain fulfillment. Because the individual exists with the society, he also will try to see that the tasks which are fulfilled biologically are in in equilibrium with the societal imposed tasks. So these tasks actually vary because the individuals also vary in their rate or progression of development. The developmental tasks help you actually to understand what you are asked to do at a particular stage. For example, a child is expected to learn. A grown man is expected to marry and have children and also earn his livelihood. An old age man is supposed to contribute to the best of his ability to the society, etc. But in spite of all these things, we find sometimes that at every stage, there are certain hazards for development. Hazards means which actually block your development. Now, once we understand what actually holds back our development, maybe we'll try to overcome these by understanding the process of that hazard as well as how to overcome them. For example, a small child who has been subjected to, say, suppose an accident, he has this fear in his mind that everything may be prone to accident. But then by gradual counseling or by gradual understanding and also the maturity or subjecting them to other influences, maybe he'll be able to overcome this disorder or this anxiety or stress. Similarly, at some stage, say an adult is not able to have a successful relation with his partner, then he is counseled or he is subjected to certain things, and he's able to rationalize himself, and then he is able to have a better prospect. Similarly, what I'm saying here is at every stage, there may be certain negative consequences or hazards or which actually come in the way of the development of an individual, but the individual, by understanding or rationalizing or understanding his situation as well as the developmental tasks and his lifespan, he is able to understand how well he should be able to get along with his life. Sometimes we find that there are delays in development. For example, you consider a child. When a small child is able to actually crawl, say about 4 or 5 months, he's supposed to be early. At the same time, a child may crawl at age of, say, 7 months or 8 months. So there may be sometimes a developmental delays. But then developmental delay does not mean that there is a hazard or there is something very problematic about it. So delays do occur in individual patterns, but they do not stop development. Sometimes there are growths, sometimes spurts, sometimes delays, but at the same time, the development is a process. But hazards, on the other hand, may sometimes, if not treated, it will cause problems. For example, if there is a child, he stammers. The parents then do not take adequately him into confidence or consult or give him enough confidence or try to set right the issue, then the child may go on stammering all his life. So the developmental hazards can be actually be set right by proper interventionist measures, or when you can try to actually help them by counseling or by talking to them or developing a healthy relationship or trying to guide them. So we have actually learned something now about one of the aspects of developmental psychology, that is lifespan development, where we try to distinguish between growth, development, and maturation. Especially, we try to understand that the development is a continuous, a more comprehensive aspect, and growth is a part of development. At the same time, we have understood that there are certain stages of development, and these stages of development should be passed by every individual when he actually is endowed with life. So every individual has to pass through these life stages or different stages of development. And each stage of development is associated with certain characteristic features, and these characteristic features actually help you to understand what tasks you are supposed to do through a particular stage. And knowing these tasks helps the individual to gradually course through all these stages and get a successful life. Now we go on to the second chapter in your textbook, where we try to deal with different theories of development. See, a theory is a concept which tries to understand by providing certain statements wherein you can usually try to assimilate or try to understand what are the different features we find into a single thread or line of argument by which you are able to understand, or you can easily understand a particular concept. For example, a theory predicts, analyzes, tries to connect all the different issues into a single thread of understanding, and therefore you're able to understand the developmental concepts in a better manner. For example, we have different theories dealing with development. One dealing with the sexual aspect of development, that is biological development, and sometimes one are dealing with the social concepts, that is how an individual grows socially, and some try to deal with the learning or the cognition. Cognition is learning or understanding, how a person grows to understand across the different developmental stages. And also we have different stages of morality or moral development. All these developmental theories try to understand a concept of development from different aspects, that is from the psychological as psychosexual, we call it as the sexual aspects by Freud, or from the moral aspects like Kohlberg's, or cognitive understanding by Piaget, that is how a person gradually tries to learn, and also Erickson's psychosocial theory, how a person gradually tries to learn the social theory. Let us now try to understand one or two theories about development. One of the things we'd like to tell you now is about the Freud's psychosexual theory. We know that all the theories talk about trying to actually grasp certain facts that are existing in the universe, and a good theory is able to be consistent, applicable to several people, and also it should be testable, verifiable, as well as it should be applicable to a number of persons and also be able to predict about the behavior of persons. That is the idea of a theory. Any good psychological theory, that is, tries to explain the concept that is existing in the nature, and it tries to actually help us predict how individuals behave in certain circumstances. Here, this particular theories which are dealing with the developmental psychology, one of them is the Freud's psychosexual development theory. Here, Freud talks about the different, what we call mind. He talks about the mind. Mind, he says, has three features, that is three aspects. One is the conscious mind, the second is unconscious mind, and there is a mind or a particular mind, what you call mental feature, which exists between these two, known as the subconscious mind. So conscious is what when you are aware, when you are awake, and when you are able to grasp things. The subconscious is in between conscious and unconscious. Unconscious is stage where, say, in your deep sleep, you are unable to feel or find out what is happening around in your environment. Now, when a mind actually tries to interact with environment, we are acting either consciously or subconscious. The unconscious, we do not act, of course, but then unconscious mind has all those aspects of a person, that is a person's wants, desires, his aims, his life goals, his impulses, his inner wants, and all these things which actually guide his behavior. Now, Freud also talks about a person's personality. Now, this personality, he says, is dependent on three aspects. That there are three features of personality he talks about. He calls actually this personality into three components. Actually, one is the id and the ego and the superego. Id is what is a biological component of your personality. For example, when you actually are unconscious, impulsive, and try to behave as if it is a child, and where you want immediate gratification. So consider a child. Suppose he wants a toy. He immediately tries to pester its parents and ask for gratification of his need. And here there are, of course, Eid also talks about hunger, sleep, sex, thirst. All these are drives which actually need, all these needs have to be gratified. So Eid tries for the immediate gratification of needs. And all these are actually is in the unconscious, it's an impulsive unconscious behavior. Whereas when we actually would like to eat something, would you actually go and eat it? We actually wait for a proper time. We wait until we reach a restaurant or home, and then we try to see if we are able to actually get the food or not. So in reality, the person tries to behave by his ego, that is try to rationalize whatever he wants to get his need gratified, what measures he takes to get the need gratified. That is, if a person is hungry, he will wait for the right place and the right way to get his food. So ego is somewhat rational and organized, but it requires the immediate gratification. A child crying for a toy is id-centric, but at the same time, a person tries to fulfill his hunger by proper means is ego. He's trying to cater to his ego. But then there is something like superego. Superego is the moral aspect of the personality. For example, whatever we do is again subjected to our parents or others' approval. When we try to do something, we try to also see that the approval of the society is given. For example, when you try to take in your food, you try to see it is as per the the societal norms. If there is a food offered in a banquet hall, you try to take your food in an orderly manner after one person or the other. So here, this is because of the moral compass or the societal guidance which is provided by your parents or others or the persons whom you respect or other relatives or other persons who actually try to influence your way of thinking. So superego actually tries to control. It tries to actually act as a moral compass and tries to guide the id as well as ego. Now here, Freud talks about the different ways in which people try to understand the defense mechanisms, because in nature, it is not that all the things we do get gratified. So in this consequence of where people try to acquire certain things or gain certain things from the environment, and sometimes where they are disappointed, not because all the needs are not satisfied, he talks about the different compensation mechanisms. These compensation mechanisms means, for example, a student wants to get good marks. He's not able to get good marks in an exam, for example. And therefore, if he's not able to, there are, of course, actions and consequences, but how the person deals with the consequences because if he is not able to deal with the consequences, the person may feel dissonance, that he is not able to be happy with himself, and therefore he may disintegrate his personality. His personality may get disintegrated. Therefore, here Freud talks about different ways of compensation of the individual, where the individual tries to compensate himself psychologically by using mechanisms, and these help him to overcome that stress or that particular behavior or particular stage and help him to get along with his life. Sometimes they are helpful, sometimes they are not, but at the same time, these are the different mechanisms he talks about. These compensation mechanisms are something called as repression, where you try to forget about the whole thing and repress it in your mind. Second is regression. That is, regression means you go back to an earlier stage. For example, if you're not happy with some aspect, you shout. For example, somebody says you expect something, you do not get it. For example, you expect a job, you do not get it. You expect a a rank in some entrance test, you're not able to get it. Then you either repress yourself or keep cool or keep that inside, or you have also regress it. Regression in the sense, you say, you shout out or say something out loud, or you're unhappy, you cry. That is the regression step. That is, you go back to an earlier stage like child and cry. Sometimes you project. Projection is, you say that the entrance test was not conducted well and you blame the other persons. Sometimes you rationalize, saying that the test may be difficult. Also, sometimes you have something like reaction formation. That is, you try to develop better ways of dealing with those things and learn better. Sometimes you say denial. You denial in the sense you do not accept it, and you say you go for revaluation. Sometimes it is displacement. Displacement is you show your anger on your parents or somebody else or a friend. And sometimes you try to sublimation. That is, you try to channelize your your unhappiness or your disquiet into all these negative emotional things into a positive aspect. So these are the different 8 types of different defense mechanisms that Freud talk about. Let me repeat them again. One is regression, repression, regression, projection, rationalization, reaction formation, and also denial, displacement, and sublimation. Now, all these stages of development are different ways of dealing with anxiety. These are known as the coping mechanisms. They help you to overcome all these problems and maintain your biological or individual integrity, and also help your psychosexual characteristics or the biological characteristics, and all how you overcome this will become on the maturation or learning you have. Depending on the learning you have had in society or your understanding or the maturation, you're also able to adapt to one of these defense mechanisms so that you are able to overcome these hazards to particular development. Then Freud talks about the different stages of the psychosexual development. He talks about the stage 1, which is the oral stage from 0 to 1.5 years, where the child is more orally, he's fixated, and that is his the mother, how he is attached to, how he sucks to his mother. That is the oral stage. He's having the milk from the mother, and therefore he's more dependent on certain aspects. Therefore, the later stages of development in the individual, for example, whether you become addicted to porn or all these things, are dependent on the gratification the child receives in the oral stage. So if he is happy, it's okay. If not, he tries to get fixated. That is, he develops in his consciousness that these are the things which he could not get, and therefore you find people getting addicted to certain oral behaviors. That is, putting the finger in the mouth or trying to suck or trying to get addicted to pan or something like that, tobacco, etc. So oral stage is the first stage from say 0 to 1.5 years. And then you have the anal stage, where there is fixation on eliminating of the feces. That is 1.5 to 3. Later, from the third stage, the individual tries to focus more on their reproductive organs or genitalia, and this fixation is seen in the called the phallic stage. Then, from the age 6 years to puberty, we talk about the latency, or where the individual tries to pursue relationships, and also try to adapt new places, have hobbies. And here, the libido gets dominant in the stage. But then the erogenous zone is somewhat not mentioned, but the fixation in stages gets carried on to the next stage. That is from the preliminary oral up till the age of 1.5 years, then from the anal stage up till the age of 3 years, and then from 3 to 6 years, you find the phallic stage. And that is at the later stage, that is the latency stage, the individual grows, develops more hobbies, tries to get along with the environment, but the libido is not actually channelized. Whereas at the stage 5, that is the genital stage, that is from the puberty onwards, say 12, 13 years onwards to the later stages, we find the individual has now sexually or there is development, and with sexuality also comes the psychological development. And here the individual is able to understand and also develop mature sexual relationships, have marriage, and also is able to rear child, because the individual in his complete lifespan development also has to develop his sexuality along with his psychological aspects. And therefore Freud talks about the development of sexuality, because all the individuals tend to reproduce and then die. So reproduction is one aspect of development, and therefore we find that when the individual grows up to a mature stage, he is able to sexually reproduce, and along with the reproductive abilities go on declining along with his age, and therefore then he dies. So reproduction is an important aspect of the development, because without the reproduction, there is no continuity of species. And in the process of the lifespan development of an individual, this is an important concept. So taking this into consideration, Freud tried to integrate the development of the psychology of an individual along with the sexual development. And it is here where he also tried to analyze the different persons from this point of development, and he was successful to a certain extent. He is known as the father of the modern psychology. At the same time, there are certain aspects of his theory which are prone to much criticism, because the psychosexual, these stages are not culturally equal in all the different societies. There are cultural deviations. All cultures do not accept this. Sometimes they say Freud has been a misogynist, that is, he has not considered the women into this aspect. His approach was considered narrow. At the same time, in spite of all these things, his theories were actually done only on few women, and they were an unrepresentative sample. And based on his own, the cultural setting of the times, as well as the women he has subjected to his experiments and his little understanding, and based on the not much of an experimental or empirical evidence, his theories were not considered. At the same time, it is also true that he has led a sort of revolution in the understanding of the psychology based on the sexual aspect. Indeed, his theory has had much to do with the gradual development of psychology based on the sexual aspect of the individual. So his is one of his theories which tries to explain the lifespan development of an individual. He also talks about certain complexes known as Oedipus complex and Electros complex while growing stages. You can understand all his stages while going in detail about the different stages of Freud. Now, there is also another theory known as Erickson Psychosocial theory. This Erickson psychosocial theory talks about the personality of an individual, trying to understand how he grows actually from the social learning or social aspect, because every individual also grows in a society. How the society treats them and how he actually fares in an environment actually helps the growth of the individual also. So here we talk about an individual personality gradually blooming from inside. Every person is born with such a potential, but whether the potential is given the chance to grow or not, this is known as the epigenetic principle. That is, indeed, the environment has a bearing on the growth of an individual. Therefore, when a person tries to develop his inner potential, he is also being subjected to the environment. So here, the stage 1 of Erickson's psychosocial theory talks about how a person's psychology depends on depends on the social aspects of his environment. He talks about the infancy to birth, that is 1 year, where there is this aspect of trust versus mistrust. Generally, a child, whether he trusts his parent or mistrusts, depends on this. For example, the child is always worried whether he is safe and whether he lives in a safe environment. Therefore, he is not able to trust his parents easily. You find a child sometimes grasps onto other things or grasps onto other objects in spite of parents. But depending on the trust given by the parents, he develops this concept of the trust. Whereas if you have what you call untrustworthy relationships, then the child also develops mistrust. So what actually develops, whether it is trust or mistrust, whether it is positive or negative experience of an individual, depends on these early stages, that is from birth to 1 year. The second stage he talks about is autonomy versus shame. That is from the age of 1 to 3 years. Autonomy means having your individuality, whereas the shame concept is whether you allow the person to have their own ideas developed, because when you give a sort of self-trust in the individuals, he's able to develop his language, he's able to develop his feelings, he's able to locomotion, or he can actually move about, he can go play, he can develop independence and freedom. The stage 3 is from the early childhood to 3 to 6 years, where the child takes certain initiatives, and if he is encouraged, he tries to go on or repeat those initiatives. But if he is reprimanded, he is scolded, then he tries to develop guilt. So this is where the stage from 3 to 6 years, the child tries to develop from initiative to guilt. The stage 4 talks about the school age or the middle age, middle childhood, where from the age of 6 to 12, you have industry versus inferiority. When somebody tries to put in some work or of some worth, he is either to be appreciated or he can be discouraged. Depending on appreciation, he will try to develop himself more by putting in more practice. If not, it gives him a feeling of inferiority. From the stage of adolescence, we talk about 12 to 18 years, there is this aspect of identity versus role confusion. A person tries to develop his identity, gets involved in different works, but at the same time, he's also confused whether he's a child or he's a grown-up, and therefore, unless the parents or his teachers are considerate enough, there's a possibility that he get confused about his different roles, and therefore, adolescent is a precarious or a very precious time where, unless they are properly guided, there is this possibility that they may be guilt-ridden, and also sometimes there is confusion about the roles, and therefore, they are not able to get along in the society. And this aspect also will have a bearing on how they are able to face the society with confidence or without confidence. Then comes the stage 6 of Erickson, where he talks about the intimacy versus isolation in the early adulthood stage, say from the 19 to 35 to 40 years. 19 to 40 years, he talks about this stage where we develop intimate relations with people. We also develop our jobs, we develop companionship, we develop friends, and we also seek love from the others in the idea of having a successful marriage or successful relationships, also having good children, etc. And how we actually foster or develop our relationships develops in this aspect of intimate relationships. Intimate relationships also are successful in the sense that they help the individuals to have a happy, balanced life. Whereas sometimes if you are not, whether the relationships are not successful, the individuals try to isolate themselves. So this is, in these stages, you find that they are intimate or isolated. Then also we have this middle adulthood, say from 35 to 65 years or 60 to 65 years, where there is either generativity or you try to develop new ideas or creativity which help the society, or sometimes you are lacking and you feel disappointed and there is stagnation. So we are talking about two issues. The last one I would talk about is stage 8, later adulthood to death. Here you have either ego integrity, where you feel you have contributed to the society, contributed to your life as a fruitful, you had a fruitful life, or sometimes you are despaired in the sense you're not able to make your mark in the world, you're unhappy about it, etc. So when Erickson talks about these theories, he's talking about two aspects which are antagonistic in nature. The first one, he talks about the first stage 1 about trust versus mistrust, The second one about autonomy versus shame. The third one about what you call the initiative versus the guilt. Fourth one about industry versus inferiority. The fifth one is identity versus confusion, role confusion. So, and also the sixth one from having intimacy to isolation. The seventh stage as generativity versus stagnation, and the eighth from ego integrity to despair. You see that these are the opposites or antagonistic characteristics. But based on one to another, we also see that these different stages actually develop these characteristics, and we can say very critically that Erickson's theory tries to actually talk about the different stages of development in context of the social relationships one has, and how these social relationships in turn try to develop the person's psychology, or his the developmental stages as such are actually intermingled with the societal development. So a person is mostly he's a social being, and therefore a fulfilled life also means having a good type of social relationships. With this, we'll stop here and we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. This is Dr. Narsimlu.
Thank you, sir.
From the Department of Psychology. We are explaining a lot for the student purpose. We are very happy to introduce to the students. Lifespan development is very beautiful subject, the psychology. Anyway, thank you very much, madam.
Thank you, sir.
All right, ma'am.
Thank you.